Between 200 and 550 AD, the allegiances of the Maya world were shared by two superpowers. Calakmul, 40 kilometers to the north of Naachtun, which vied for supremacy with Tikal, 60 kilometers to the south. In the 4th century, Tikal was the dominant city. Often at war, the city developed quickly and gained the upper hand over neighboring towns. But perhaps it became too influential because a third player who had nothing to do with the Maya civilization was unhappy about this regional powerhouse that was emerging. Teotihuacan in Mexico was more than 1,000 kilometers away. It was a huge city that enjoyed political, economic, and religious influence across the whole of Central America. To Teotihuacan, Tikal was a potential enemy and had to be dominated. But how could Teotihuacan conquer Tikal? And did Naachtun play a role in this conquest? Until now, archaeologists have found it hard to believe that an army of warriors from Teotihuacan could have marched more than 1,000 kilometers to defeat Tikal. There was no real evidence of a conflict. However, this proof did exist. But the archaeologists in Naachtun had gone past it several times without noticing. The story was right there, on the face of the stones. All they had to do was to decode it. Last year, Philippe Nondeodeo decided to work together with a renowned epigraphist, Alfonso Lacadena. Alfonso examined all the stones in Naachtun, and this medium-sized one in particular. It is not the most imposing stone on this site, but it is, without doubt, the most enlightening. It revealed the strategy deployed by Cinq, the Teotihuacan emissary.
This is what it said.
Bolon ok, minanguaye, bujol, uyahaute, sillaccac. Es una maravilla.
It's absolutely amazing to be able to read what they're telling us. The text describes the king of Naachtun as Siegkak's military leader. This is very important because it confirms that the arrival of Teotihuacanos in Petén Maya was not an action undertaken by them alone, but that Maya groups joined in with them. And the king of Naachtun participated actively in this military conflict.
Naachtun allied with Teotihuacan against Tikal. Thanks to their troop numbers and the provisioning potential that Naachtun could offer, the army under Cinq would have been able to take on Tikal.
I'd be embarrassed to tell you what I did when I discovered the stone. I was extremely emotional. It's rare in a professional career to come across a monument as important as this one. It was a gift, an undreamt of piece of professional luck.
On 16 January 378, the Teotihuacan emissary arrived at the gates of Tikal with troops from Naachtun. The king of the city was captured, and no doubt sacrificed, and replaced by the son of the Teotihuacan leader. Tikal then becomes the most powerful city in the Maya lowlands.
'95, 23, 95. Is that the original wall?
In the chaos of stones, ruined walls, and collapsed temples, the archaeologists are trying to understand how Naachtun changed after this episode.
Here we are on the pyramid. You have to imagine that there is a monumental staircase that goes from this side, and behind us, there is a square, with this huge area below it, with a central square and buildings all around it. As soon as you see it, you know it's a pyramid. Big foundations with a square in the middle.
The first topographical studies of this construction revealed the shapes still somewhat vague of the temples constructed one after the other. For Philippe, this was the city's funeral acropolis. Constructed just like the necropolis in Tikal, it is home to the tombs of the first great kings of Naachtun.
What is amazing and what really struck us when we came here for the first time in 2010 is these finger marks here. They used a mud coating here that was applied by hand. So you can see the marks their fingers left where the mud was smoothed over the stones fairly clearly here on the wall. That gives you a direct connection with the king's workers who constructed this chamber. The walls are covered with a kind of stucco that was painted red. It's hematite. So they used a fairly precious material that is quite difficult to get a hold of, which shows the status of the king and his capacity to get his hands on sought-after raw materials and prestigious goods.
Hundreds of years later, these riches attracted looters. More than 300 illegally dug tunnels have been discovered in the site of Naachtun. And the Acropolis was one of the first victims.
All the information taken away by looters is information we will never recover. So, for example, if there was a name painted, sculpted, or etched on a royal container, that's information we will never get back. So here, we have a lovely chamber, very well built for an important person, but one that will never be able to link to a dynasty that we might have been able to establish from the epigraphy. So yes, there is a great deal of frustration.
At the start of the 5th century, the huge Acropolis would have looked down over the west of the site. Further to the east, another square, a palace, and an imposing pyramid would have transformed this little town into a regional capital that could now rival Tikal. The city was home to thousands of people. Craftsmen and farmers for the most part, they would have cultivated in little fields and exploited the resources the forest had to offer. The forests of Petén are home to thousands of animal and plant species. The Mayas used the trees for construction, firewood, and fruit. They hunted animals there to feed themselves. But for these people, this natural environment was much more than a source of food. The various species in the forest represent natural forces. Here, every creature has a master spirit, and divinities are constantly revealing themselves. Night is falling in Naachtun. The dig has been going for 40 days now. In the camp, everyone has developed their own habits. When night falls, the temperature is cooler, and little groups form to hang out together. Away from his colleagues, Dominique is back on his travels, examining the 7th and 8th centuries of Maya history. What happened to Naachtun during this period? And where might he be able to find some clues? During this period, large and small kingdoms fought one another in merciless wars. Alliances and betrayals happened in a heartbeat. Rulers were overthrown and new powers emerged. Calakmul, the seat of the Snake Kingdom, had previously kept itself to itself, but now started to extend its influence and power. Naachtun, allied with Tikal for centuries, was concerned by the rise in power of this city-state with a population of some 40,000 inhabitants. What role would it play in this emerging rivalry?
The kingdom of the snake in the history of classical Maya worlds was a major kingdom and much discussed in many sites. It was a kingdom that was imposing itself, spreading its influence in all directions. It was a conquering, expansionist kingdom, and its kings, who believed they were descendants of the snake, wanted to extend their power in all directions.
At the time, Tikal was seen by Calakmul as an enemy to fight. To gain the upper hand over its great rival, Calakmul gradually encircled and controlled it, suffocating the towns that remained loyal to Tikal.
Those years when Calakmul was at the height of its powers were a critical period in the history of Naachtun. That was the only time in its history when Naachtun was really dominated by the Khan dynasty and by Calakmul.
Did Naachtun abandon Tikal for Calakmul? Was it dominated by the Snake Kings? Until now, no archaeological evidence has enabled this to be clearly established. And yet proof did exist at the foot of one particular building in the form of a princess.
We know she is a princess by her long skirt, a huipil, which goes down to her ankles, and which is decorated with a lattice pattern. And on each cross, you might imagine that there was a shellfish there. This lattice pattern is fairly characteristic of the princesses of Calakmul. So finding this long skirt here on a princess in Naachtun tells us that she is a Calakmul princess who came here to Naachtun to marry the local king.